Hello, fellow Bible readers. Welcome back. So yesterday we left off ending in the book of Second Chronicles, and we stopped at chapter 23. Now we're reading Obadiah 1, and the book of Obadiah may or may not have come after what we read yesterday in chronological order, but there are suggestions that it actually did. And then we'll also be taking lessons from Psalm 82 and 83. So now we're reading it, even though I said it may or may not, but we're reading it now because it relates to a few events that we just read about in Second Chronicles 12, where Shishak, the king of Egypt, invaded Judah, and Edom's revolt against Jehoram, which we read about yesterday in Second Chronicles 2:21. Now Edom, the nation, descended from Esau, if you remember. Israel descended from the twin, Esau's twin, and then Edom descended from Jacob. So obviously we know this. Esau and Jacob were twins, and so the Edomites are the descendants of Esau, and therefore they are Israel's closest relative. They had a serious case of siblings rivalry, the twins, which started in the womb, and the history of rivalry continued in the story and the history of both nations. Edomites were the closest relatives of the 12th tribe and also the closest neighbors of Judah. Obadiah announced that Edom's day of reckoning had come as God summoned the nations as instruments of his wrath. This was because as Israel's closest relatives and neighbors, they should have helped them when they were invaded supposedly by Shishak, Egypt, the king of Egypt. Instead, they aided and abetted their enemies. God had commanded them in Deuteronomy 23:7 to treat Israel with special consideration, but they violated this command and incited God's wrath. In 11:4, we see a list of the crimes charged against Edom by God through Obadiah the prophet. Not only did they stand by when Judah was being invaded, they took part as well and killed some of those who were trying to escape and captured others as well. God said that it was because of their pride that they didn't help Judah. Now, if we remember a few back in the time of the Exodus, there was a bit of a scuffle when the Israelites wanted to pass through Edom to get to the promised land, and the Edomites said no and made them go another way. I feel as if all these things were just sort of like underlying factors in perhaps the way the Edomites viewed the Israelites. In verse 15, we see the day of the Lord is mentioned. And this could mean a period in history where God acts spectacularly to display his glory, which most of us know as maybe the second coming or judgment day, or the second is the final day or judgment day of all the nations by Jesus. But the spectacular display of God's power is something that the prophets in those days used to describe or used to explain the day of the Lord. Edom's judgment was that they would be devoured by the people of Israel. Israel shall take possession of Edom, and they will cease to exist as a people. And this is true because I found out that there are no Edomites. No one can say today we have Israelis as they are called now, but there are no Edomites or Edomies. Sorry, I just had to make that joke. I know it's bad. So going over to Psalm 82. Psalm 82 is a plea for justice. It's all about God's call to help the needy and oppressed, just like God expected from Edom to Israel. So I feel like there's a connection there. God's judgment, the psalmist called on God to judge the nations as Edom was judged for the injustices done to Israel. The general theme also points to God's judgment of his enemies, likely Satan and his fallen angels. In verse 7 of Psalm 82, it says, "But you shall die like men and fall like one of the princes." So in a narrative that I listened to, it seemed like it was talking about how Satan obviously used to be Lucifer, one of the the cherubim, from what they said, not just an ordinary angel, and then he was thrown down. And so this was said as perhaps a prophecy, but you shall die like men and you shall fall like one of the princes. Lucifer, who was the prince of the morning or the son of the morning or something, could be related. In Psalm 83, we see it follow the same theme and is a call on God to frustrate conspiracy against Israel. It references Edom along with other tribes that collaborated against or came against Israel. No, this word isn't collaborated, it is attacked. Listen, I think I'm going to have to start typing these things, but then, there's something to be said about, writing. I'm still of the old school. I like to write my Bible notes, but perhaps I need to start typing it because this handwriting is going from bad to worse. Anyway, here's my lesson. Here's what I learned about God from reading these chapters. God takes it personally when his people are mistreated. Their enemies are his enemies, and he surely executes judgment over them. So for me and for you, I say, let your heart be at rest, knowing that whoever or whatever attempts to or succeeds in bullying you will eventually get to deal with your heavenly Father, who has his eyes on you and doesn't deal kindly with bullies. How comforting is that? Thank you for sharing today's lessons with me. Tomorrow we'll continue, and I'll be here to share lessons from 2 Kings 1 to 4, God willing. See you here. Have a wonderful day. Bye.